Hello to all my dear followers. I'd like to welcome you to a new chapter of What if Naruto trains to become a Genjutsu master alongside Kurenai? At the top right of the screen, I've left a card with a playlist showing all the chapters of this fanfic in order. Please, I ask for your likes and comments so I can bring you more chapters. Without further ado, enjoy.
Naruto's team was sitting in the hotel room Naruto had acquired for their assault. The new room was identical to the one they had spent the past 4 days in. They had only changed rooms because this town and hotel were closer to their attack points than the previous village. Their attention was centered on the slightly altered map in front of them. The only alteration that was on the map were the sets of arrows drawn between each of the camps. 2 sets of arrows point away from the camps, heading towards the other camps, while the other set point towards the camp from the other camps. Next to each of these sets of arrows was a number which denoted the amount of reinforcements that each camp would send to their fellow camps when they sent out their distress signal. As expected by the more experienced ninja, the bandits were well organized and fortified their camps accordingly when one would come under attack. It explained why they had been capable of keeping their numbers so high while skirting the borders. Naruto had been a little surprised when he found out that when he attacked the smallest camp, the main camp didn't send out reinforcements for just the smallest camp but also a contingent to check on and reinforce the middle-sized camp as well. Okay, so are we all agreed to the plan? Naruto asked. His team nodded at him. Naruto let loose a small sigh of relief. His plan had been well received by his team, with only a small deviation on his original plan. Of course, his team had praised his plan as ingenious and intuitive. It also showcased the planning and effort Naruto had previously put into his pranks. As a side effect of this, it also impressed upon Yugao and Anko that Naruto has a very unique and creative mindset when he was pushed to come up with a plan, something which they quickly realized made him a formidable foe or commander on almost any battleground, as he was capable of coming up with a new plan almost instantly when they had almost botched their escape during one of their raids. It had been Naruto's mistake from the beginning, getting too close to the bandits, which resulted in one of the Chunin-sized chakras managing to sense him. It didn't take long for that chakra to move towards him. A small but formidable-looking group of bandits following behind him when Naruto realized his mistake and froze for a few moments. Yugao, who had been staying near him to keep him safe as he tested their defenses, readied herself for killing the bandit group, when Naruto suddenly snapped his eyes to hers. She had seen his eyes flash before he seemingly disappeared into the shadows of the trees. She blinked slightly, wondering where he had gone when she realized that he had just successfully hidden himself from view and hurried to do the same herself. Of course, Naruto's plan hadn't been complete as the group of bandits entered the small clearing where she and Naruto had been standing mere moments before. One man, a plain-looking, brown-haired and black-eyed man, looked around before frowning. Figuring that this man was the one with the Chunin-sized chakra, Yugao watched as they stood there for a few moments more before one of the bandits complained about being away from the fighting and supposed easy loot. Right as he finished his talk, however, Naruto had walked into the clearing. Yugao had to keep herself from jumping into the clearing next to him as he smirked at the group of bandits, then turned around and proceeded to run away on the ground. The bandits and the Chunin-sized chakra guy all gave chase almost immediately. Only the chakra person had taken a lingering look at the clearing before heading after his fellow bandits. While incredibly simple, much like their attack plan, his plan had accomplished a few things that Yugao's attack would not have. The first and most obvious was that the guys now chasing Naruto were none the wiser to anyone other than Naruto in the immediate vicinity. Not that any of them would have been capable of reporting back. There was a chance of them figuring out that Naruto wasn't alone by the difference between their kills as Yugao used a sword. The second was that they were now disillusioned as to whether or not Naruto had real ninja training or was just a one-trick pony with his clones. Finally, it served to avoid causing a fight which may have drawn in more bandits from the camp if they hadn't been capable of easily dispatching their opponents, thus leading to a scale of fight which they were not interested in just yet. Naruto took another look at the map before looking at Kurenai, a slightly worried look coming across his face as she nodded at him. She needed to head out first. Anko would be leaving shortly as well. Naruto shook his head. Okay then, we should be heading back to Konoha tomorrow morning. Let's get this done with no casualties, all right? He said, looking at his team, whom smiled lightly at him as his concerned gaze didn't lighten from his face as he turned to each of them. If you think it will be too much, just send a call out on the radio and we can try this again later, agreed? He asked, looking at them yet again. Again, 3 nods were his answer and he closed his eyes. Dismissed then, he said. Though he couldn't see it, Kurenai sent him a concerned look before disappearing in her shunshin to accomplish her task. Anko wasted no time as well, following Kurenai almost immediately so she could get into position. Naruto sighed, worried about his plan. Don't worry so much, Naruto-kun, Yugao said gently, laying a comforting hand on the young man's broad shoulders. Naruto held his head in his hands, still obviously worried. They can take care of themselves and your plan is probably one of the best and simplest ones we could use. It'll be fine, she said as she coaxed him to look at her with his hand. Naruto sighed again. I know, Yugao-chan. I just worry about them, he said as he looked up at her from his seat next to her, his worry shining through as he looked at the time. We should get going too, he said after a small moment of silence. Yugao nodded to him and the 2 ninja disappeared in their own shunshin. Scene break. As Naruto and Yugao moved into position near the main camp of the bandits, Naruto thought back to the plan that he had concocted for his team. The plan was, as Yugao had said, rather simple. It involved 2 distractions, Kurenai and Anko, to draw as many people from the main camp away and into the smaller camps. As Naruto had predicted, the worst camp to attack had been the main camp, as they had eventually had almost all of the 1,500 bandits in that one camp. Surprisingly, the smallest camp would be the best to hit first. Naruto had thought that the middle camp would be best, as that camp was closest to the main camp as well as easier to get to considering the terrain between the 2 camps. But, after their hit-and-run tactics, the team had discovered that the main camp sent the most away when the smallest camp was attacked first. As a matter of fact, they would send almost 200 bandits from the main camp to the smallest. After this, they planned on hitting the middle camp, drawing another 100 bandits from the main camp, leaving them with 6 of their previous 900-strong force. Naruto and Yugao were set to attack the main camp. Kurenai was chosen to initiate their attack by taking the smallest camp and Anko was to attack the middle-sized camp shortly thereafter. Naruto took a moment to think of the traps between the camps, remembering how Anko had said her summons would somehow make sure the messengers bringing the information of the attacks would make it through their traps, and felt a small sliver of pride show through as Anko had praised his traps when they had set them. Naruto dropped down next to Yugao as they reached their chosen position to lie in wait for the messengers which would bring news of the attacks from the other camps. Naruto produced a few clones, all of whom jumped into the foliage and ran away from them stealthily as they took their positions. Looking at the main camp yet again, Naruto saw that they had the normal 2 guards set at the posts despite the fact they had been attacked recently. Sparing a glance at Yugao, their eyes met and the 2 nodded to each other as they settled in to wait. The sky had gained the slightest tinge of pink when Naruto felt the messenger appear on the edge of his sensor. Naruto signaled Yugao that he sensed the man and Yugao nodded back as they heard the man come rushing through the foliage of the forest. Arriving at the camp's guards, the man quickly spoke. The Agama camp is under attack, the man nearly shouted. The sentries exchanged glances before both pulled the swords they had on their hips. Raising them to point at the intruder, the guard on the left spoke first. What's te passcode? The bandit drawled. The messenger seemed confused for a moment. His apparent rush had him leave his thoughts way behind him in a figurative sense, but the man quickly straightened after processing what the guard had asked, especially with the weapons pointed at his person. The fire is more profitable than the lightning, but the lightning is slower to strike. The man recited and Naruto idly wondered if the passcode had a hidden meaning but noticed that the guards then let the messenger through to carry his message to their superiors as they stood guard. Naruto and Yugao glanced at each other, confirming that Kurenai had set their plan in motion. Agama was the village closest to the smallest camp. Both of them prepared as they saw that the guard were now slightly more alert upon learning that one of their allies were under attack. It wasn't much longer before there was motion in the camp and the bandits were quickly picked up and told to go defend their other camp. Naruto and Yugao took note of how the group of ragtag people held no ranks and not one person seemed above any of the others as they seemingly trickled away into the forests back towards the smallest camp. Settling in, Naruto went over his preparations within the mission and nodded one final time, noting that the messenger from Anko's camp was arriving. Watching as a repeat of what had happened with the earlier messenger happened again, Yugao and Naruto waited until they could no longer sense or hear the last of the reinforcements and set their plan into motion, By now the sky was turning purple, and started with the two guards they had been watching. Yugao looked at Naruto and nodded. Naruto closed his eyes, concentrating before he opened them and started his hand seals. Yugao watched closely as Naruto's Genjutsu took effect. The guard on the right seemed to pan his eyes around the ground until he turned his eyes on his fellow guard, upon which the guard's eyes widened and then narrowed as he let out a scream of rage. "I'll kill you!" The man screamed as his sword flashed upon the unsuspecting victim of his fellow guardsman. The man hacked and slashed at his supposed comrade, aiming for the man's head first, instantly killing the man as the sword split his head in two, before continuing on, carving deep cuts into the man's chest and body. Of course, the furious bellow had rang out across the camp, waking many of the bandits near them. The bandits didn't take long to come running out of their tents, some of them almost naked as they took in the scene of one of their guardsmen hacking his fellow guardsmen to pieces. A few of the closest bandits stepped closer to the enraged guardsman, intent on stopping him from continuing his body mutilation. This turned out to be a horrible decision for them, as once they stepped into the crazed man's gaze, he immediately leapt at them with the same furious expression that he had when he had been hacking at the other bandit. His second target wasn't as unprepared as his first. As such, the man did manage to raise a guard against the enraged man's attack, but his ferocity surprised the bandit and his guard was quickly overpowered as the enraged man brought his weapon down into the man's head, instantly killing him as well. This had two effects. The first was every bandit then considered the man a threat, grabbing whatever weapons they could. They watched as the enraged man then started to hack at the body just as he had his first victim. The second wasn't as obvious. A group of about 4 bandits, all of whom had been staring in slight horror at how their apparent comrade had treated his own, dropped their weapons as they all stared in abject horror at what they were seeing. It didn't take long for the 4 of them to turn and run, fleeing deeper into the bandit camp while screaming about demons and the like, much of which made little sense. Yugao's jaw was threatening to drop as she saw Naruto cast not only one high-level Genjutsu but then yet another simultaneously, all the while never releasing or mixing either. She resolved to find out exactly what he had those horrified bandits see as she set her eyes on the bandit camp, which was now starting to get very rowdy as men were running to and fro. Obviously his clones had done something similar to what Naruto had accomplished. She looked back to Naruto, noticing how he was now gazing at the bandit camp with his icy blue gaze. She briefly felt glad that he wasn't her enemy as she and Naruto joined into the fray, Naruto summoning another 12 clones as they began to cut into the bandits. Naruto himself felt a slight bit of excitement as he appeared in the bandits' camp with his clones almost instantly falling upon the confused bandits surrounding them. Their attention had been upon the man Naruto had used as a distraction before. Although Naruto didn't revel in bloodshed or killing, he knew that he would be forced to in his life and he accepted that. The reason Naruto felt excitement was he wanted to try out his new taijutsu style a bit more thoroughly. Sure, he used a basic stance against Neji, but it was mainly to avoid his attack. Now, he could let loose and find out exactly how destructive and how effective his style and abilities were. As such, when his clones split up and headed deeper into the bandits' camp, he waited slightly as the remaining bandits came to their senses and noticed he was still standing there. He sensed that Yugao was starting her own slaughtering as he felt her flit through the camp with hardly any opposition. He smiled as he saw how intimidated the bandits seemed to be. "Well?" Naruto asked as he looked at the biggest bandit in the area. The bandit stared back at him as Naruto's icy gaze tore into him. "Are you gonna attack or just stand there?" he asked. His excitement was almost palpable as his body jumped as soon as the bandits started forward towards him. Naruto felt like he was in one of those action movies as he dipped his body under the initial sword swipe from the bandit leader, sweeping his leg out and tripping the man as another bandit swung a bat at his prone form. Naruto smirked as he twisted his body away from the attack, feeling the bat whistle right next to his head as he flipped himself away from the attack, catching a rushing bandit in the chest as he pulled a kunai and tossed it at the 2 bandits he had just gotten away from. Sounds of metal tearing through flesh rewarded Naruto's actions as Naruto crouched on the man's chest and pushed off of him, catapulting himself into the air so he could see how confused the now 6 bandits had become. He noticed they had all converged on his previous place and were now watching as he sailed through the air towards the ground. 2 of the bandits seemed to shake themselves and hurried to reach his landing zone before he could land, and Naruto smirked as he took a deep breath and did 3 hand seals before breathing out. "Futon de Tapa," he said as his air rushed out, blowing 2 of the bandits onto their backs, and the other 4 merely blocked their eyes as the vicious wind slammed into them. Naruto landed lightly, looking at his opponents, all of whom seemed thoroughly frightened at how easily he had dealt with them so far, and he had already killed 2 of them. Naruto took a breath before setting himself in his stance. His front legs slightly raised so his toes were touching the ground, and his back legs supported all of his weight as he raised his hands in front of him, fingers pointing to the sky. Naruto waited, watching as the bandits recovered, then looked to their comrades for reassurance before charging forward. All of them at once. Naruto took a deep breath as they neared, watching as the first swung his sword, and Naruto sidestepped it, allowing it to whistle in the air as his leg came up and connected with the man's chest. The sound of bones crunching filled the air as the man dropped to the floor. The bandits didn't waste a moment as the second man came in, a sword in a crude handhold as well swinging at him. Naruto leaned back further onto his back leg, allowing the sword to miss his chest barely as Naruto shifted his weight, bringing his leg around in a horizontal kick, hitting the second man in the ribs. Again, the sound of crunching bones set in the air as the man dropped his weapon and then to the floor himself. This time, the bandits hesitated, the remaining 4 unsure of what they wanted to do before the one man with a lengthened weapon, a spear of some kind, charged forward, attempting to impale Naruto on his weapon before Naruto could react. Naruto watched as the man grew closer before jumping into the air, easily clearing the man's lunge, and Naruto's icy gaze was the last thing the man saw as Naruto's heel collided with the man's head and he was sent to the ground. Unconscious bliss, the only thing he now knew. Naruto turned to the remaining 3 bandits, and was only slightly surprised when he saw they were now fleeing the area. He sighed, wishing he could have gotten a better workout before starting hand seals again, and then saying, "Hari Jigaku," sending Senbon-like hair after his fleeing opponents and quickly killing them. Naruto headed further into the camp, hearing the dying screams of the bandits along with a single popping sign as he received the memories of his first clone to be defeated. It wasn't much longer before Naruto came across a group of bandits, being led by one of the obvious leaders of the camps as they all formed behind the man. The bandit leader quickly pointed out Naruto to his group. "Kill him! The one who brings me his head will be his choice of the next batch of women." The man yelled at his group. The group didn't waste any time in rushing forward, intent on harming him. Naruto's own visage twisted in hate as he heard of the reward for his death. Breathing in quickly, Naruto went through hand seals of a jutsu he had only recently mastered before breathing out. Naruto watched in almost abstract disgust at how easily his jutsu cut into and through their ranks as the bandits' screams of pain and death filled the air. "Futon, Kamaitachi," Naruto whispered to himself as he looked at the 40-odd bandits now littering the ground and the 10 bandits plus the leader who were looking in fear at Naruto. Scene break. It was disgusting to Naruto how easily he, a mere genin, could dispatch a bandit. In Intercept, Naruto realized that those bandits stood no chance as his wind jutsu was undetectable until he cast it, and then it was only noticeable as it cut the floor when he was near the ground. If he were to cast that jutsu while in the air, you would only be able to notice a slight disturbance in the air as he blew it towards you without chakra sensing abilities. As such, it wasn't like a fireball or a spike of earth being thrown at you. It was much harder to notice and even harder to dodge because of that. Of course, this brought him to the genjutsu he had cast upon those unsuspecting bandits to start their raid earlier. He had put the guard under a normal false surroundings genjutsu, allowing the man to see his partner basically kissing a woman that he found desirable, possibly even his girlfriend, if the guard had one currently. Once the man saw that, he would become enraged. However, this rage was enhanced by Naruto's secondary genjutsu, which entwined with his initial technique. This one drew upon Naruto's own experiences with Kyuubi's bloodlust. He took the overwhelming rage he would feel and used that to enhance the man's rage to the point that he was willing to kill his fellow guardsmen despite the fact that the man had done nothing to bring about his ire. Of course, with such levels of rage, it had catapulted to the level of the man was willing to attack anyone nearby. Naruto hadn't completely expected that part, but he had thought it might happen. Naruto noticed that the bandits in front of him were starting to gain some confidence in their numbers again, but he just took a few kunai out and threw them towards his opponents, watching as 3 of them managed to land within their targets but the rest dodged. The fight resumed as the bandits then picked themselves back up and charged Naruto, who kept his mind mainly on the fight but couldn't get the sight of those other men in the crowds having run away from his second technique. That Genjutsu was another of his own creations, with a little influence from the Kyuubi. What the bandits saw were two monstrous, about the size of a wagon, foxes, both snarling and with evil red eyes, standing directly behind the enraged man as they looked hungrily at the group of bandits. The foxes had grinned evilly, much like the Kyuubi before leaping forward intent on devouring their prey when the bandits turned and ran away as the figurative foxes ran after them. Naruto could almost hear Kyuubi chuckling malevolently in his mind as Naruto thought of how fast the men had run. Naruto blocked the first attack of the bandit near him, lashing out with a kunai and sticking it straight into the man's chest as he used the body of the now dead bandit to shield himself from another attack. The body was slightly heavy and Naruto quickly let go of the dead weight as he stepped around his makeshift shield and landed a devastating kick to his previous attacker's head, causing the man to drop to the ground with a glazed look. Naruto almost mindlessly took care of the rest of his attackers. They were hardly a challenge after having fought Neji, Gaara, and Sasuke. As he looked at their dead bodies, the leader of the bandits' head now lying at his feet, Thogets whirled in his head. How many does that make? 2? 300? He asked himself. He still hadn't found the real bandit leader, but he doubted that the man would try to run because he probably thought himself safe within his own camp. Naruto's head snapped over to where he felt Yugao's chakra spike, wondering why she would be using that much chakra when a chakra signature landed near him. So, you're the one who's been wreaking so much havoc in this little gravy train I set up. The man's voice floated to him. Turning so he could assess his threat, Naruto noticed that this man was not the same one whose head he needed to bring back to Konoha to prove his mission a success. That meant one of a few things: either this man was bluffing, he was the brains behind the brawn, or Konoha's information had gotten the wrong man. Looking at how the man carried himself and the aura of confidence surrounding him, Naruto suspected this man may just be smart enough to remain in the shadows to avoid being targeted. The man was pretty nondescript as a person went. Dark brown hair topped a plain face with light brown eyes and a decently muscled body. He was obviously muscular but not overly so. His arms were slightly larger than the rest of his muscles, but that must have been because of the bow staff that reminded Naruto of the Sandame's legendary companion, the Monkey King Enma. He was wearing ragged-looking clothes that would fit a bandit, but Naruto looked closer and noticed that the clothes were much better than the rags that most of the bandits surrounding them were wearing. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he took the same taijutsu stance as he had in front of Neji, watching his opponent carefully. I must say, I had expected Konoha ninja to eventually appear, but I never thought they would send me one of their most promising ninja to be slaughtered. The ninja said, almost totally disregarding Naruto's obvious wariness. It was eerily similar to how Orochimaru had treated him. The man's eyes traveled all over his own body and Naruto tensed as the man's eyes locked with his own. Icy blue met solid brown and sparks seemed to fly. Uzumaki Naruto, Konoha's blade of illusion, and Yuzuki Yugao, the swords mistress of the moon. The man said as if testing their names, shaking his head. Well, I should get to the point. My colleagues are powerful in their own rights, but they stand little chance against your comrades if I can't help them soon. The man said as he reached behind himself, drawing his bow staff. The name's Yamasaki Zokusei, he said as Naruto reached into his pouch and flung 3 shuriken at the man, whom easily blocked the incoming strikes with his bow staff. And I'm going to kill you. Naruto's eyes widened as the man disappeared from his sight. Almost immediately after, Naruto felt Zokusei appear next to him. Naruto had no chance to dodge or even pull off a substitution as the man's staff smashed into Naruto's side. Zokusei wasted no time, following Naruto's tumbling body with his impressive speed, attempting to take advantage of Naruto's obvious confusion. Swinging his staff down on Naruto's tumbling body, Zokusei's face displayed a frown and look of disappointment as his weapon headed directly for his opponent's head. Zokusei was unprepared when Naruto's body disappeared and his staff was planted into the ground. Zokusei smiled as his eyes turned to where Naruto was standing, a few paces away from him, breathing slightly hard, holding his side, and dribbling blood from a corner of his mouth as he stared down his opponent. Good, your reputation isn't just hype, he said quietly as he looked at Naruto. This should be fun. Naruto's thoughts, on the other hand, were running a mile a minute. Fuck! He thought as he looked at the bow staff warily. If staffs hit that hard, no wonder Gigi uses them. He almost broke 3 of my ribs with just one attack. Naruto pressed down upon his tender side and thanked Kurenai's dodging training to allow him to launch himself in the same direction the staff was attacking to minimize the damage. Still, he thought to himself, I don't know exactly how much damage he can cause with just a single hit. I need to be careful. Making a single hand sign, Naruto released his weights. Again, Zokusei smiled, looking almost anxious about starting this fight in earnest. I've got a code 8 here. Naruto spoke into his headset as lowly as possible. This meant that Naruto was fighting an enemy he was rather sure he couldn't defeat but could slow down for a minimal amount of time. It also gave his teammates the information that Naruto didn't think he could escape from this fight. Doton, Genjutsu. 1, Zokusei said, causing Naruto to jump away from his position as spikes of earth shot up from the ground, each easily sharp enough to have pierced into and through Naruto had he been standing there. Naruto spun his body as he landed, dodging his opponent's bow staff as he placed his hands on the ground and thrust his leg out to catch Zokusei in the legs. Jumping over the attack by using his staff as a pillar, Zokusei brought his own punch down on Naruto's body. Luckily for Naruto, he managed to roll his shoulder as the man's punch landed. Again, Naruto winced as he rolled once before jumping to his feet, holding his bruised shoulder. Zokusei chuckled deeply. Slippery little fellow, aren't ya? He said as he flexed his hand. Naruto summoned for Kage Bunshins. All of them drew a kunai along with the original as they ran forward to attack the enemy. Zokusei's eyes gleamed as he hefted his staff and moved forward to meet Naruto's headlong rush with one of his own. Naruto's clones staggered themselves so that each would be capable of flowing together with their comrades instead of trying to pile onto Zokusei. Zokusei himself grinned as he swung his weapon, connecting with Naruto's first clone, dispelling it in a cloud of smoke. A second Naruto leapt forward. Attempting to take advantage of the openings, he could see that Zokusei's swing had left. Naruto's attack was met with a vicious elbow from the man, showing that he was not defenseless when he swung his impressively sized weapon. Zokusei grinned as he saw his opponent disappear in a puff of smoke yet again. The remaining 3 Narutos all moved forward, one ducking underneath the staff's backswing with the other 2 jumped above it. Zokusei let his staff go, allowing its momentum to swing it away from himself and land on the ground a step away from himself, as he lashed out at the Naruto still rushing him on the ground. Naruto's body twisted as he barely managed to avoid Zokusei's fist. Feeling the air rush past him left Naruto grateful to Kurenai's training once again. Naruto moved himself away from his opponent once more, allowing himself time to think. Naruto cursed himself as he replayed the memories of his other 2 clones. Seeing exactly how outmatched he was in taijutsu struck a blow to Naruto much closer than he would have liked. Naruto knew he was lacking in areas he was desperately working on improving, but he stood little to no chance against an opponent of this level. Yet, he could attempt to catch the man in a Genjutsu, but his previous actions and words led Naruto to believe the man was a seasoned ninja. Naruto seriously doubted that his very limited wind jutsu could get past even one of this man's defensive earthen jutsu. While Zokusei had not used anything other than one jutsu, Naruto was almost certain he could feel the earth element deep inside Zokusei. Of course, I would run across someone like this on my first leading mission, Naruto thought dejectedly for a moment. The only way I see out of here is catching him in an Akuma Genjutsu long enough to escape. Zokusei's grin had transformed into a full-blown smile as he watched Naruto's calculating eyes dart around. Apparently, he was enjoying this fight. Only the rush of wind accompanied Zokusei's movement this time. His staff crashed into Naruto's clones furiously. 3 clouds of smoke greeted his actions and Zokusei's smile widened. Managed to hide yourself with your clones? Zokusei said more than questioned. His eyes scanned the surrounding area, looking at the ruined tents and the bodies surrounding their battleground. The sounds and screams of fighting still raged around them. You hid yourself well, he said, a tone of respect tinging his tone. Zokusei spun quickly, his staff lashing out and destroying the 3 Narutos behind him. Again, 3 bursts of smoke accompanied his attack. Zokusei's smile faltered slightly as he blinked in slight confusion. Another puff of smoke appeared behind Zokusei as another Naruto appeared. Naruto's hand was outstretched, his kunai on a direct course for his opponent's kidneys. Only Zokusei's experience and reflexes saved him from his gruesome fate. His body spun instinctively, causing Naruto's kunai to glance on the man's stomach. A long gash appeared from his attack, but Naruto grunted, as did Zokusei. Naruto's mouth opened in a cough as he was flung away from his opponent once again. Blood flicked from his mouth and coated his lips as he felt the repercussions from Zokusei's attack. Naruto crashed into a tent and groaned out in pain from his newest injury. Naruto lay on his back, blinking repeatedly as he tried to clear his head from the mild concussion he must have incurred from Zokusei's punch. I can't believe his punch is that strong. It's almost like he's an Akimichi on one of those special pills Shika's dad helped make. Naruto thought to himself. Naruto's bloodline saved him from a gruesome attack as, despite his obvious pain, Naruto's body flipped up and over the incoming punch, landing Naruto on a knee behind Zokusei. Zokusei turned around, his smile tinged with a feeling of bloodlust as he looked on Naruto with an even greater respect than before. Naruto took in his opponent's body, realizing that he had activated some sort of jutsu which darkened his skin almost to a metallic black. Zokusei put a hand over his wounded side, covering the line of blood pulsing from it as he grunted. "I underestimated you," he said, looking at Naruto with a frown before smiling widely. "I greatly underestimated you and I paid for it." He sounded almost happy about it. "Doton Domu, too. This is one of my most powerful defensive jutsus," he told Naruto. "You may have managed to land that hit earlier, but this is the end." Naruto grunted as he spit out another glob of blood, watching Zokusei go through hand seals as fast as he had seen Kakashi before slamming his hand down on the ground. "Doton, Musaburutsuki, 3. He called out. Naruto stumbled slightly as the ground shook and two jaws appeared on either side of himself. Before Naruto could dodge, the jaws rushed towards each other, trapping and smashing Naruto between their sharp edges. A disgusting squelching sound filled the air as Zokusei looked upon his jutsu. His eyes then panned around the area as he stood once again, taking in everything around him before a bright light appeared from between the two mangled pieces of earth that his jutsu had unearthed. Zokusei quickly covered his eyes. Suspecting an attack, he lashed out blindly with his staff in a circular motion, spinning his whole body in place. He was rewarded with a grunt of pain as he connected with Naruto's leaping form. 1. Naruto crashed to the ground once again while his arm was burning from the strike he had blocked. He had almost lost feeling in it as he raised his head to contemplate what to do against Zokusei. Zokusei was shaking his head as he stared at Naruto's prone form. He suddenly smirked as he shifted his weight, preparing for a rush. Naruto groaned as he turned his body, propping himself on the rubble behind himself as he went through a few short hand seals and blew from his mouth. "Futon. Kamaitashi." His voice mingled with his technique as a veritable wall of almost imperceptible cutting winds were flung from him and towards Zokusei. "Doton, Doryuhiki, 4. Zokusei said as he formed a single hand seal, and a wall of earth rose in front of himself, blocking Naruto's jutsu. Naruto smirked slightly as he saw the wall of earth come up. Zokusei turned from behind his wall and blocked an incoming kunai with his forearm, obviously expecting his armor to protect himself. Surprise colored his face as he watched the kunai dig deep into his arm guards. Zokusei blinked before a wide smile suddenly erupted from his face. "Kai!" he said as he dispelled the genjutsu Naruto had placed upon him. Looking around at the surrounding area, Zokusei let out a barking laugh. "Little shit actually managed to catch me," he said with a tone of happiness. "Finally, a worthy opponent. Such a shame that he didn't have a few more years to sharpen his skills. He might have been a deadly opponent." He commented sadly as he noticed Naruto's fleeing form further in the camp, heading towards his companion. Shaking his head, Zokusei headed after his prey with a predatory gleam in his eyes. "Scene break, damn it," Naruto said as he held his crushed side, feeling his bruised and battered body screaming in protest from his movements as he tried to gain some distance between himself and Zokusei. He knew he was no match for the man from the beginning, but the gap had only kept increasing. After he had activated that defense, Naruto knew he had to try to get to where he could feel Yugao. Together with her, he might stand a chance of surviving the apparently crazy person's attacks. Thinking back, Naruto realized how foolish it had been for him to actually stay as long as he did. He should have retreated once he had fooled Zokusei the first time, when he had managed to wound the man, but he had gone for the kill instead. Now, his decision was coming back to haunt him as he felt Zokusei quickly start to head towards him, catching up much faster than Naruto liked. Quickly going over his arsenal, Naruto knew he couldn't match the man in ninjutsu, genjutsu, or taijutsu. He hadn't been under his genjutsu more than 10 seconds before figuring out his influence. With all of those options cut off, Naruto felt a sense of hopelessness engulf him as he recognized just how far he had to train and go until he could fight against someone of Kurenai's caliber. Even someone of Izumo or Kotetsu's level would be capable of at least fighting this man off. As Zokusei's chakra neared, Naruto felt Yugao's chakra settle. Hoping she had finished her fight, Naruto wished he could just summon her to himself. Fucking hell, Naruto thought. I forgot all about summoning. I have a bunch of battle toads who could have helped me out from the start. Naruto cursed again. As caught up as he was in berating himself, Naruto missed Zokusei's next attack as it connected directly with his chest. Naruto bounced over the ground as if a stone skipping on a surface of calm water before crashing into more rubble. Very good in catching me, Zokusei praised. I'm usually able to detect those genjutsu much faster, but I guess you're just showing your skill, he said as he looked down at Naruto, who was wheezing and coughing more blood from this most recent hit. Unfortunately, this is where it ends for you. Goodbye, Uzumaki Naruto, he said as Naruto raised his head to look at the staff that was speeding towards his head. Naruto was much too disoriented and hurt to even move, much less dodge the speeding weapon. He could feel Kyuubi's Yuki surge slightly as the weapon closed in on himself, his short life flashing before his eyes as he frowned slightly. He glared at Zokusei, questioning who he must be to say that he was dead before he had managed to land the killing blow. A primal instinct surging through Naruto had him staring defiantly into his attacker's eyes as the man's staff inched closer to his head. Naruto groaned as he shifted himself awake, slowly coming to the surface of his thoughts. Ugh, what happened? He asked himself as he attempted to have his arm reach up to press against his forehead. I feel like I got run over by one of those trains I heard about from Snow Country. Naruto was slightly surprised when he realized his hand had yet to move from at his side, despite his telling the limb to lift itself. Slowly attempting to figure out where he was, Naruto took a deep whiff of the surrounding area. Let's see. Smells really clean. With that horrid stench that comes from a whole bunch of cleaning supplies, really smells like a hospital, he thought. Naruto stiffened as that thought ran through his head and his memories came crashing back to him. Zokusei's overwhelming speed and power once he had managed to stab the man. How he requested backup from his team. How he had tried to get away. How easily his opponent had managed to catch up to him. How he had been knocked unconscious right after Yugao had appeared above him. Naruto's eyes flew open and his senses stretched as much as possible as he felt aches and pains around most of his torso affect him. He ignored the twinges he could feel from still healing injuries that he was sure would be gone shortly as he took in the white ceiling above him. His eyes quickly adjusted to the dim lighting, allowing him to see the white walls surrounding him as well as the curtains closed over a window next to his bed. The door, bed, and chair that completed his room were as white as the rest of the room. Naruto sighed lightly as he felt the familiar texture of Konoha's hospital's sheets. The hospital, he thought in derision. Of course they brought me to the hospital, he lamented. Hospitals. Kyuubi taunted. Really? It asked with a hint of derision in its tone. Hospitals are what scare you the most? I can't believe it. You have no idea how horrible hospitals really are. Naruto shot back. He shivered lightly. All those weird doctors that want to poke and prod you, all those nurses who want to stick needles into you. He shivered again. Plus, the thing is devoid of color and smells of death and cleanliness. It's disgusting. Well, at least I know how to annoy you now. Just conjure up an image of the hospital room and you will cower like a little kid. The Kyuubi taunted as it receded back into its cage with malicious chuckles while Naruto shivered yet again. Looking at the curtains, Naruto noticed that the light coming from the window meant that it was probably mid-morning. He could hear the nurses moving in the corridors and he quickly looked for his clothing. Noticing his clothes were lying in a neatly folded pile on the chair next to his bed, Naruto quickly made his plan to escape. Okay, I'm going to quietly get out of bed, change into my clothes, then take the scenic route out of here, he thought as he quietly slipped himself from his bed, his feet slapping on the cold floor as he flinched slightly. He spared a glance at the door as he quickly shed the hospital gown on his person and slowly pulled the 4-drip he noticed in his right arm out. Quietly setting those items onto his bed, he crept over to his clothes, constantly looking over at the door as if he were in enemy territory and about to be caught naked. Naruto pulled his clothes on as fast as possible, his shirt and pants quickly covering him as his sash was tied around his waist. He blinked as he felt a scroll in the hidden compartment of his legs. He wondered who would have missed that, but then remembered what was in the scroll. A chill of fear ran down his back as he quickly leaned down, ignoring the tightness in his chest as he pulled the scroll out while wiping some blood on the seal. In a puff of smoke, the box that contained the bracelet he had bought for Kurenai laid in front of him. He breathed a small sigh of relief which was quickly sucked back in as he heard voices outside his door. He placed the box back into his pocket. Quietly backing up, Naruto reached his window and slowly opened it before looking outside and noticing he was on the 2nd floor. He grinned slightly as he turned and set a foot onto the window sill and launched himself from the 2nd floor, grunting as he felt his old aches return slightly. He smiled as he felt the wind rush past him, and he landed in the street next to the hospital without anyone around. Shaking his head, Naruto turned and headed to his apartment. He wanted to freshen up before finding Kurenai and then having to report to his Gigi. Scene break. Naruto trudged towards the door of his apartment, his mind elsewhere as he thought about his report and how he would tell the Hokage what happened. Opening his door absent-mindedly, while slipping inside and taking his shoes off, Naruto blinked as his nose was met with the similar smell of the hospital. Drawing himself from his thoughts, Naruto looked at his apartment and was surprised to find it marginally cleaner than he had left it before the mission. His kitchen was no longer overflowing with instant ramen cups and the few vegetables that he had added to his diet. His living room didn't have the papers he had been writing Genjutsu ideas on all strewn about but were, instead, stacked in a neat pile on his coffee table. Looking at the cleanliness, it reminded Naruto of something, yet he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Naruto was confused. Most people who came into his apartment ransacked the place, burned or trashed anything they thought was valuable. This person, whoever had done it, had cleaned up his home. Guess someone can surprise me, Naruto thought to himself as he decided not to refuse the gift he had been given. Walking towards his room, Naruto smiled as he thought of whoever would do this. It warmed him to think someone might actually care for him enough to clean his home without even having him here. Of course, it also brought the question of who would care enough for him to do such a thing. Naruto stepped into his room and then blinked as the answer to his previous question was lying on his bed, sleeping soundly. He smiled even brighter as he looked around his clean room, blushing slightly as he saw his dirty boxers peeking out from his hamper of clothes. He did like to keep his apartment clean, yet hadn't had time to do a thorough cleaning since before the Chunin exams almost 2 months ago. His place had steadily declined into a zone of haphazardly thrown around pieces of clothing and trash. As he stepped further into his room, as quietly as he was capable with his wounds, Naruto's smile turned into a gentler one as he slipped above the woman sleeping on his bed with the cutest expression he had ever seen on her face since he had met her. He placed his back against his battered headboard, since lying down had aggravated his wounds, and crossed his legs as he placed her head in his lap. Naruto didn't know what possessed him to take such an intimate position, but he found he particularly enjoyed the connection he felt with her. I should have guessed that it was Kurenai-chan who would do this, Naruto thought to himself as his hands still combed through her curly black hair. Scene break. Time passed as Naruto lost himself in his thoughts, thinking about all of the times he had spent with Kurenai. When he had stumbled across her in his clearing, when she had taken him shopping and bought what he was now wearing, when she had agreed to train him, the night he had comforted her, and the dream that followed. Naruto blushed as he got to his more recent thoughts, and his eyes darted down to her gently rising chest as flashes of what he had seen when he first met her appeared before his mind's eye. He tore his eyes away from her body with some effort and concentrated on calming his rapidly beating heart as he watched her face. Unfortunately, watching her face brought back flashes of the kisses that he had shared with her so far. He took a deep, shuddering breath and let it out, He wanted to kiss her and his body shuddered lightly as he tried to resist. He knew Kurenai wouldn't mind, but he didn't want to wake her just yet. He knew she would be fraught with worry over his wounds, and he was loath to remove her from her apparent peacefulness. Naruto felt movement from under him. Looking down found him looking into Kurenai's red orbs, obviously open, obviously furious, and there was an undeniable underlying hint of concern in her eyes as Naruto froze where he was. Naruto was paralyzed as Kurenai lifted herself from his lap, leaning forward. She said nothing as her face approached his, her blazing orbs of red locked with his own eyes. He gulped slightly as she came closer and he shifted nervously. "Hi, Kei Kurenai Sage-chan," he said quietly while his voice betrayed his nervousness. Kurenai didn't respond and Naruto closed his eyes in preparation for the verbal lashing that her eyes promised him. He was taken completely by surprise when he felt Kurenai's body mash itself to his own and her lips maul his own in a passionate kiss. He blinked as Kurenai's tongue roamed around in his mouth and she pressed herself even harder into his body. Kurenai backed away, leaving a panting Naruto underneath her who tried to comprehend what just happened. "Kei Kurenai," he said before Kurenai's lips were upon him again, silencing his question before he could even voice it. This time, though, Naruto was ready and his own tongue fought back. He reveled in the passion with which she kissed him, and he wondered slightly where this had come from when Kurenai nibbled on his lower lip, causing him to moan slightly. Kurenai pulled away again, her red orbs blazing into his own as she slowly uncrossed his legs, placing them next to her own body as she shimmied down and placed her head on his chest, her ear directly over his left breast. She let out a sigh of relief as her head rested upon his heartbeat. Naruto blinked again, wondering what had gotten into Kurenai, and opened his mouth to speak. "Don't ever worry me like that again," Kurenai whispered. Naruto looked down at her, confusion on his face as he heard her whisper. He didn't know what she was talking about. Worry her? When had he worried her? He knew that he probably wasn't in the best of shape after his fight, but was he so hurt that she was that shaken? "It's not like she knows I was close to dying if Yugao-chan hadn't shown up when she did," he thought to himself. "Not ever again," she said. "Do you hear me, Naruto?" Her head tilted so her ruby orbs were locked with his own sapphires. He was powerless to do anything other than nod his head to acquiesce to what she wanted. He couldn't ever remember her eyes burning so intensely before. An inner fire lit her eyes so they seemed to be flickering despite the steady light of his room. "Promise me," she demanded, her voice growing slightly desperate and mostly steely. "I want your promise, Naruto," she said again as Naruto was still entranced by the look in her eyes. The two stared into each other's eyes, one trying to muddle through his clouded mind enough to answer his opposite, and the other fiercely staring into her companion's eyes, the look seeming almost as if she were trying to impose her will onto Naruto. Their stare down was completed as Naruto's brain finally caught up with what he was experiencing and his eyes softened. "I promise, Kurenai-chan," he whispered to his girlfriend. He was rewarded with a smile that spread across Kurenai's face, one that smoothed the lines of concern that had been etched on her face since she had woken. Her peace seemingly restored. She sighed in what sounded like relief and her body relaxed against Naruto's body as her head returned to a more comfortable place. Her ear was still pressed against his left breast. Her eyes were closed as she listened to his heartbeat. She laid a hand along his chest as her other laid underneath her body. Naruto blushed again from her proximity, but he couldn't deny he enjoyed the connection they were sharing. His hand started combing through her hair again, earning an approving gasp from Kurenai. He smiled as he marveled at how soft her hair felt. Naruto had no way to gauge how long they had simply sat on his bed, enjoying each other's company, other than the movement of the sun through his window. When he noticed that it was getting close to lunch, and he hadn't eaten anything yet today, he loathed moving Kurenai, but he was getting quite hungry. He looked down at Kurenai, whose hand and ear remained glued to his chest as she just laid there. Looking at her, he remembered the gift he had gotten her and he fingered the box sitting in pocket. He smiled as he thought of a way to, at least, get her to start talking. "So," he said, drawing her attention from watching his heartbeat. "Why did you clean my apartment?" he asked. Kurenai smiled. "I knew you didn't like hospitals, so I figured that waiting for you here was going to be the fastest way for finding you when you woke up." she said as Naruto grinned sheepishly. If you weren't able to get away from the hospital, then they would have found me as I was the leader of the mission once you were knocked out. Naruto nodded. When I got here, I couldn't stand just waiting around, so I picked up. She finished as she rubbed her head against his chest slightly. Speaking of not being able to stand something, Naruto said, I got you something to cheer you up. Kurenai pushed herself up, leaning on one hand as she looked at him. Cheer me up? She asked curiously. Naruto rubbed the back of his head as he brought out the present, handing her the box with a small bit of trepidation. Yeah, he stumbled again. I know that you were irritated all throughout the mission because of the Kumo thing, and I thought that getting you something might help, so here, he said as Kurenai suddenly looked down at the box with a bit more enthusiasm. She reached out and took the jewelry box from him, an eyebrow raised in curiosity and wonder. Naruto nervously watched her open the box. The plain silver bracelet he had picked out was laid before her. It was as elegant as it was beautiful, much like Naruto saw Kurenai. While the silver had nothing special to it, being a flowery inlaid silver band, her name was engraved in a flowing script that enhanced the bracelet's look as much as the tastefully placed citron and ruby surrounding her name did. As a matter of fact, the ruby seemed to be part of the flower's petals, as the citron seemed almost as if it were the sun's rays feeding the stem of the flower that wrapped around the bracelet. Kurenai's eyes widened at the bracelet as she reached into the box, lifting the bracelet and running her fingers across the silver with a gentle touch. She sucked in a small breath as her eyes flickered over to Naruto's, who was still nervous about how she would like it. He was slightly startled when she seemed to choke on a sob as her eyes watered slightly. He blinked, surprised at her response as she slowly replaced the bracelet in its box before placing it next to them on the bed and wiping her eyes. He was now worried that she didn't like the gift, and he tried to keep the disappointment he felt from his eyes, but she smiled at him after she wiped her eyes. The gift is beautiful, Naruto-kun. That's not why I choked up there, she said. Naruto didn't hide the shock or curiosity he felt from that statement. He looked at Kurenai expectantly, and she turned away from him with a small blush on her face. I have to apologize to you, Naruto-kun, she said. Again, Naruto was confused, but she continued before he could speak. I told you that I was upset about the Kumo incident a few years back, and that was why I was upset during the mission. That's only partially true, she admitted as Naruto had his suspicions confirmed. I admit that I was kinda annoyed about that kiss Uchiha gave you, she finally said after she had paused. But why? He asked, confusion evident in his voice, and Kurenai seemed to cringe slightly. I mean, it wasn't anything other than a goodbye kiss to me, he said as his face adopted a thinking pose. And why would you need to apologize for that anyways? He asked. Kurenai sighed softly, still looking away from him. I was annoyed because she kissed you, Naruto-kun, she said quietly, as if admitting this was some kind of weakness. It doesn't matter that it was only a goodbye kiss. It still annoys me that someone else kissed you. Naruto didn't understand it, yet he felt pursuing that fact was almost a lost cause, sort of like an intuition that was telling him to just let it go, and he did listen to this voice. But why would you need to apologize for that? He asked again. At this, Kurenai looked him in the eyes. He could see a bit of guilt lying there, and he hated it. He didn't want her blaming herself. Because I forgot about how you were raised, Naruto-kun, she admitted. Naruto blinked. Confusion was all he could feel from that statement. What did it matter how he was raised? I mean, that you probably don't know how women act when they are angry, Naruto-kun, she said softly, apparently trying to break this to him gently. You see, women are very territorial about our men, and when we get angry, we expect our men to be able to pinpoint what we are angry about and fix without us having to tell them, she said with a hint of embarrassment in her voice. Well, most of us anyways. She smiled slightly at him. Naruto blinked, still confused about why women would act like that. It was like before, he couldn't understand why Kurenai or any woman would feel like that. I mean, didn't Kurenai know he liked her? And that he would never do anything to hurt their relationship? And how was he supposed to know what was wrong if she didn't tell him what the problem was? That doesn't make any sense, Naruto finally said. I mean, you know I wouldn't do anything to hurt our relationship, and how am I supposed to help if I don't know what's wrong? He said as he scrunched his face up in confusion and frustration. Kurenai giggled, looking at his frustration with a small bit of amusement. It's just how things are, Naruto-kun, she said. Naruto shook his head, opening his mouth to ask her another question. He paused slightly. His eyes darted to the gift, then back to Kurenai before sighing. That same voice from before was telling him to drop it. So, do you like your gift? He asked nervously. Kurenai picked the bracelet back up, taking it out of the box and slipping it onto her wrist easily. She held her arm up so the silver caught the light beautifully. She smiled brightly as she looked at him. Yes, it's perfect, thank you, she said as she leaned in and kissed him chastely before standing and stretching. Naruto enjoyed the way the light framed her body as she stretched. He blushed slightly as she cracked her eyes open to see him staring at her. She smiled, just like the last time she had caught him. I'm assuming you haven't eaten anything today? She asked. His stomach grumbled to answer her question, and he chuckled sheepishly as she smiled a bit wider. Well, let's go get some lunch and then we can go report to Hokage-sama. Naruto nodded happily, excited about spending lunch with Kurenai. Scene break. Lunch had been a quiet date. Both Naruto and Kurenai had simply enjoyed each other's company as they ate their meals with small talk. Naruto was feeling much better since he woke up. It was especially heartening that Kurenai loved her gift, and Naruto couldn't suppress the grin of happiness he was wearing as Kurenai continually snuck glances at her new accessory. Naruto and Kurenai both walked into the Hokage's waiting room. Looking at the secretary, Team Naruto, reporting in, Naruto said as he dropped his happy grin. The secretary looked up at Naruto and Kurenai from her work and nodded, finishing whatever she was writing before standing and walking towards the Hokage's office. She entered the office after having knocked, and the two shinobi were left in silence only for a few moments before the secretary returned. Go right in, she said as she sat back down at her desk. Naruto and Kurenai both nodded to the woman before approaching the office of their commanding officer. Knocking, come in. The Sandame's voice came from his office. Naruto opened the door and held it open as he gestured for Kurenai to precede him. She smiled at him as she took the show of courtesy gracefully, stepping past him and into the room. Naruto quickly followed and looked back up to the familiar office of his Gigi. Naruto was slightly surprised when Anko suddenly materialized next to him, draping herself over his shoulders and nuzzling his cheek with her head. Naruto-kun, you're okay, she said exuberantly. To Naruto's credit, he didn't blush as heavily as he had the first two times she had done this, and, instead, had a tinge of pink to his cheeks as he smiled slightly. He did send a quick, worried glance at Kurenai, but she was smiling, as if she were looking upon an endearing sight. He was slightly confused on what made this different from what Yujito did, yet he decided he would ask her at some other time as he chuckled lightly. I'm glad to see you unharmed as well, Anko-chan, he said with warmth in his voice. Naruto could feel Anko grin as she stopped rubbing herself upon him when they heard the Hokage clear his throat. All three shinobi looked at their commanding officer with questioning gazes. I'm glad to see you, Naruto-kun, he said kindly. Naruto nodded at his Gigi, still stuck in his spot by the door because of Anko. Although, I can't help but wonder why I was uninformed of your release from the hospital, he said with a serious gaze. Naruto chuckled sheepishly as he brought a hand up to rub his neck in an old habit that showed he was uncomfortable. I wanted them to let me surprise you? Naruto asked in a small voice. Sarutobi sighed as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. A slightly tense silence fell upon the room as the Hokage's eyes remained closed. He suddenly seemed to sink in upon himself, his countenance losing the rigidity he had when they walked in. I suppose I should just be happy you didn't escape from the hospital in the same manner as last time, he said as he looked at Naruto with a wry grin. Naruto's sheepish grin turned foxy as his eyes glinted. Kurenai and Anko both shared a glance before looking between Naruto and the Hokage, both of whom seemed to be enjoying an inside joke. Anko actually stood up and moved next to Kurenai so she could get another view, but it didn't help her any. Naruto rolled his shoulders, and a small wince was the only indication of the pain he was feeling. He idly wondered what was wrong with the Kyuubi and why it hadn't helped heal him yet. All of the shinobi caught the wince. Concern did flash in their eyes, but they trusted Naruto to know if he was pushing himself too hard. I want you to make sure you get checked out by a doctor before doing any more training. Is that understood, Naruto? The Sandame ordered. Naruto nodded immediately, recognizing when he had to be serious, and Sarutobi smiled gently again. Very well then. I will inform the hospital that you discharged yourself. Just don't do it again, Naruto-kun, he said. Naruto's answering frown said much, but the Hokage just sighed as he shook his head, muttering to himself, "Why do I even bother?" It was quiet for a few more moments before the Hokage spoke again. "I have already heard the reports from the rest of your team, Naruto-kun," he informed him. Naruto nodded, having expected as much. "As such, I only need you to tell me what happened before Yugao, Kurenai, and Anko managed to save you from this Sokusei." Naruto nodded, making a note to buy a small thank you for Yugao and Anko. "There isn't much to tell then," he said, looking directly at his commander. "I managed to catch the guards at the camp in a few of my Genjutsu. They spread enough havoc for Yugao-chan and I to enter the camp and do what we needed," he said as he thought back, trying to remember if anything came to mind as odd. It was mostly thugs like the ones from Wave until Zokusei showed up, and then he trailed off, not much liking what he was about to say. "Toyed with me until I managed to get away and Yugao-chan found me," he said. The tightness in his voice was obvious to all of the surrounding shinobi. "That is all you have to add, Naruto-kun?" Sarutobi asked again. Naruto thought for a moment before nodding. "Then I expect the written report in 1 week's time," he said as Naruto nodded yet again. He frowned gently as he looked at Naruto, who was obviously upset about what he had just revealed. "Want to talk about it, Naruto-kun?" he asked. Naruto shot a look at his Gigi before his eyes went to Anko, then Kurenai. He sighed in frustration as his hand ran through his hair. "I'm just frustrated," he admitted. Anko, Kurenai, and the Hokage nodded. "I know I'm not that strong now, but the way he toyed with me," he trailed off again, Orochimaru aside. "I've never been so outclassed by an opponent capable of actually killing me. Kurenai-sensei and Yugao-chan certainly spar with me, but they won't ever actually kill me, and I know that, so I guess this was just a realization," he asked as he looked at the floor, trying to put his emotions into words. "I know that I shouldn't have been able to beat him, but I can't help feeling I should have," he admitted. "I want to be able to beat all of my opponents just like he was beating me," he said. The Hokage nodded. "That is very simply put, Naruto-kun. I am glad you feel that way. I also know that you will eventually reach that place of power," he said as he smiled gently at his surrogate grandson. Naruto smiled lightly as he saw his Gigi's smile. "I also hope you use that strength to protect those that are precious to you, just like a Konoha shinobi should," he said with an even brighter smile. Naruto blinked slightly before nodding. He let out another sigh and looked at Kurenai and Anko, both of whom were watching him with approving looks in their eyes. He smiled a bit brighter as he turned back to his Gigi. "Thanks, Gigi," he said. The Hokage nodded. "Now then, on to happier business," he said as he adopted a more serious expression. "Uzumaki Naruto," he said as Naruto snapped to attention. "By joint decision of the Hokage and the Lord of Fire himself, I hereby promote you to the rank of Chunin based on your performances during the Chunin selection exams, times of war, and the leadership ability displayed upon your recent mission. Congratulations," he said as the group of shinobi stared in shock at the smiling visage of the Hokage as he produced a scroll that displayed Naruto's new, the same color gray as his clothes with burnt orange stripes down the side seams, Chunin vest along with the new identification papers. Naruto reached forward with a stunned look on his face, running his hand along the Chunin vest on the desk in front of him with some reverence. He looked back up to the Hokage before turning an eye on Kurenai and Anko, both of whom were now smiling. He smiled even brighter as he lifted the vest and pulled it on outside of his clothes. The Hokage chuckled. "While I disagreed with the Lord of Fire on sending you on that mission, he wished to test your abilities while in the field as a commander before putting his recommendation in. With his recommendation and my own, the council has no say in whether you get promoted. Congratulations, Naruto-kun, you've earned it," the Hokage explained. Naruto was still smiling, but that quickly turned to a small frown. "How long was I out?" he asked. "About 3 days, Naruto-kun," Kurenai answered in place of the Hokage. "We got back here a day ago." Naruto nodded his head. "Then he wasn't out for like a week." He smiled again and the atmosphere was lightened. "If that is all, Gigi?" Naruto asked with a smile. Sarutobi nodded and made a shooing motion with his hand as Naruto turned and walked out with part of his team. Scene break. Naruto was walking back to his apartment, Anko having left quickly since she was due in the interrogation department, and Kurenai heading to her own home to rest up from the worry that Naruto had been the cause of during the past 3 days. Anko did leave Naruto with a parting offer. Anytime you need a person for your team, feel free to look me up, Narukuin. She had purred at him before disappearing in a shunshin. Naruto was, absent-mindedly, running his hands over his new vest, marveling at the fact that he had been promoted faster than anyone else from his class. His mouth curled into a wide smile at that thought. It was mostly due to Kurenai's teachings that he had done so. He had graduated at the bottom of his class, and yet he was now the most accomplished one by far. He had his name in the bingo book, had his own moniker that had been bestowed upon him by someone whom thought he was worthy of attention, and he had just been promoted to Chunin. Climbing the stairs to his apartment, Naruto was glad that he would be able to rest soon, and possibly talk to Kyubi to see if anything was wrong. Cresting his stairs, Naruto froze. "Uzumaki Naruto, you open this door right now," came the woman's voice in front of him. Being temporarily frozen didn't keep Naruto's own body from realizing the danger he was in, and he quietly attempted to turn and flee back down his stairs. Unfortunately, his stairs were still the creaky old stairs that made up his entire apartment complex, and he cringed as he heard the squeak that he could feel brought the enraged woman's stare upon his back. "There you are." Naruto turned around, smiling weakly. "Why Yoshino-chan?" he said with trepidation in his voice, hoping calling her that would assuage some of the rage that only she seemed capable of channeling. "Don't you Yoshino-chan me, Naruto?" Nara Yoshino said from her place in front of his apartment door, hands on her hips as she glared down at the slowly approaching shinobi in front of her. "Where have you been?" she asked sternly. Naruto chuckled weakly. I had a mission after the invasion, so I didn't have time to tell you," he responded. Anyone looking at this scene without knowing who these two people are might assume that Yoshino was a mother scolding her child, despite their obvious different genetics. Yoshino huffed. "Nonsense. You definitely had time to tell myself or Shika," she said as she still glared down at him. "Besides that, where did you disappear to during the month before the finals?" she asked as she looked at him curiously. "And I never got a chance to ask you about that ridiculous hair of yours," she huffed again as she eyed him critically. Naruto put a hand through his hair, looking at her defensively. Kurenai liked his hair, and he wasn't going to get it cut. Besides, it helped with his jutsu to not have to grow his hair so much for the Hari Jizo. I didn't have time to tell you because we left straight after the invasion. I disappeared to train with Kurenai-sensei and my new teacher, and my hair comes from the seal for the Kyubi," he said as he tried to diffuse her tirade before she really got rolling. Yoshino's eyes widened slightly as the last thing he said. "Are you okay?" she asked immediately. She even stepped forward with the intention to help him when Naruto smiled at her concern. "I'm fine, Yoshino-chan," he said. His voice was filled with warmth. "Gigi checked the seal and nothing is wrong, just a side effect," he explained. Yoshino relaxed as she smiled back at him, before she bit the bottom part of her lip. "We were worried, Naruto-kun," she said in a softer voice, one he had heard her use with Shikamaru only when she was trying to get him to actually listen to her. He felt a spike of guilt at how he had been avoiding them so much lately. "You disappeared after the preliminaries and we didn't know what to think, Naruto-kun," she said as she gazed concernedly at him. Naruto sighed sadly. He couldn't help the feeling of warmth that spread in his chest as he heard Yoshino's words. At the same time, he was assaulted with the guilt of having not seen them and explained things to them. Shikamaru didn't say much about it, so he had almost forgotten about how motherly Yoshino had been acting towards him ever since he had become friends with Shikamaru. "I'm sorry, Yoshino-chan. I didn't mean to avoid you. I just didn't want to interrupt your time with Shika right after the preliminaries." He missed Yoshino's small smile. "And then I got caught up with training. Then came the finals and the invasion," he trailed off slightly. "I didn't even have time to think before this last mission. I was planning on visiting tomorrow," he said, even though he hadn't made those plans yet, hoping to assuage her concerns. Silence fell between the two of them. Yoshino was staring at Naruto as he silently pleaded for her to accept his less than acceptable apology. Naruto's eyes were widened in a fake innocence as he pouted at Yoshino. She sighed lightly. "Stop looking like that, Naruto-kun," she said as she lightly rubbed her eyes. "You know I can't resist you when you look like that." She narrowed her eyes at him. Naruto was wearing a knowing grin. Yoshino grinned as well. Naruto felt a shiver run down his back. "Now, get your butt inside and change into your kimono. You're coming to the house tonight," she said in her steely voice. Naruto blinked before hanging his head as he had been looking forward to resting for the rest of the, admittedly, short day. The sun was already low on the horizon. He trudged up to his door, smiling up at Yoshino when she placed a warm hand on his head as he opened the door and stepped inside with Yoshino following him. Yoshino blinked when she saw Naruto's living conditions. Naruto hid a small smile when he saw the surprise on her face. He knew she was surprised at how clean it was. Personally, he was proud of how clean it was too, even if he hadn't been the one to clean it so well. Naruto let Yoshino take in his apartment as he walked into his room, slowly stripping his shirt off of himself and wincing as he felt the tenderness of where Zokusei had hit him. He quickly finished divesting himself of the rest of his clothes, caring little that his door was open to where Yoshino was standing. He moved over to his closet, looking for the kimonos he had commissioned to be made for himself. Luckily, he had ordered his a little larger and, despite his recent growth spurt, his kimono still fit surprisingly well. He chose a light blue color background with gray-colored calligraphy dotted around the foreground. Rummaging through his closet, he picked up his Geta sandals and left his room, presenting himself for Yoshino's inspection, as he had seen Shikamaru do before. He made a slightly mocking bow as he twirled slowly to show Yoshino his kimono. Naruto smirked at Yoshino when he saw how she narrowed her eyes, despite the fact he liked her. Naruto couldn't resist teasing Yoshino a bit about how she was acting. Yoshino smirked as she motioned Naruto over. "Come here," she said. Naruto took the few steps forward to be right in front of her and then stood there, awaiting what she was going to do. Yoshino smoothed out a few creases in his kimono and checked his obi before turning him around, and he felt her hands comb through his hair. He stiffened slightly, wondering if she was going to cut his hair. "Are you set on having this ridiculous hairstyle?" she asked quietly, making sure her own feelings about the way his hair was abundantly known. Yet, Naruto knew she was asking his own personal opinion at the same time. "Yes," he said immediately. Yoshino sighed and Naruto suddenly felt some tugging going on in his hair. "What are you dash?" he asked, only to be shushed by Yoshino as she worked on whatever she was doing to his hair. It was a few minutes later, as Yoshino hummed with her work, that she spoke. "You know, you look very handsome in that kimono, Naruto-kun," she said gently and sweetly. Naruto blinked slightly in confusion but smiled as he blushed slightly. "Thank you, Yoshino," he replied. Naruto couldn't see it, but he was sure Yoshino was smiling gently at him. How was he sure that she was? Well, Naruto had heard that type of phrase and that exact tone of voice when Shikamaru dressed up for anything. Every time Yoshino would compliment on how handsome he looked in a gentle and sweet voice, then send a smile filled with pride at him to show she meant it. Shikamaru always dismissed his mother's comments, but Naruto knew he loved his mother dearly, and that he did treasure when he was complimented on his work. It was one of the reasons he even did it, as troublesome as it may seem. Naruto felt warmth blossom in his chest as he thought of the similarities on how Yoshino treated Shikamaru and himself. It was so alike Naruto would swear he was occasionally part of the Nara family from how she scolded him, like earlier. She had yet to compliment him on anything until tonight, and Naruto felt a deep sense of gratitude towards this woman who had taken it upon herself to treat him much like her own son. "Done," Yoshino said happily from her place on the couch and stood, leading Naruto to a mirror in the bathroom so he could see the massive braid now running along his spine, tied together with a simple blue ribbon. He blinked in surprise, never having thought of this himself. "So," Yoshino said from his side. "Do you like it?" she asked, looking at him curiously. Naruto turned to the left and right, looking at his hair before smiling. "Very much. Thank you, Yoshino," he said. The warmth in his voice was overflowing, the gratitude he felt towards her for her actions spilling over. Yoshino smiled as well, obviously pleased with herself as she ushered him to the door, and they were quickly off, towards the Nara compound. Scene break. It didn't take Naruto as long to reach the Nara compound as usual, considering Yoshino dragged him through the middle of the city and then to the Nara compound with an unusual amount of hurry. When they reached the compound, Yoshino quickly ushered him inside and Naruto was blasted with music, the din of voices, along with the smells of alcohol and food. He blinked in surprise at the sudden party he seemed to have been thrust into. He looked over next to him, only to notice Yoshino had disappeared into the crowd. Naruto quickly came to the realization that Yoshino had planned this, and despite how tired he felt, along with the immense urge to just slip back out to his own apartment, he merely sighed as he moved further into the group of people. He noticed a few people as he walked. First was the obvious Akimichi he had befriended at his many visits to their restaurants and the few times Chuji had brought him to their compound. Next were the few Naras he had met during his friendship with Shikamaru. After them, he couldn't really recognize anyone else until he was close to the drink counter, where he recognized Inoichi sitting there drinking with Shikaku. Naruto quickly reversed direction, not wishing to deal with what Inoichi might feel of his failed date with Ino. Unfortunately for Naruto, turning like this placed him directly in front of someone whom he had strained relations with. "Oh!" Ino exclaimed as Naruto almost ran into her from his hasty retreat of the drink counter. Naruto quickly spun himself, managing to keep from hitting Ino, and settled a few steps away from where he had been. Naruto's eyes widened slightly when he saw Ino staring at him when he finally regained his sense of balance. A tense silence filled the air between the two of them. Naruto wasn't particularly angry at this point. He had accepted the slight Ino had done to him, acknowledged to himself that he may have overreacted a little bit, and then finally decided to just leave Ino alone. He wouldn't avoid the girl, but he wouldn't be inclined to ever spend more time in her presence than he really needed to. In other words, he wasn't interested in her friendship, so he would work with her when necessary and try to be cordial in his dealings otherwise. Hi Naruto," Ino said with an odd look on her face, like she was trying to figure something out she never would. Naruto blinked, not expecting her response. "Hello," he said back blandly. Again, the tense silence seemed to reign between the two of them, despite the sounds of the party surrounding them. It was so thick, Naruto was sure someone could come up and almost cut the air with a knife. Naruto looked towards Ino, having noticed that they both kept their eyes averted from each other, and noticed she was looking away from him while still having that confused expression upon her face. "I see that troublesome woman managed to find and drag you here, Eneru?" Shikamaru said as he seemed to phase into existence from the crowd. "Hey Shika," Naruto said as he hid the slight surprise from the sudden appearance of his friend. He smiled at Shikamaru as he smiled at him. "Weren't you getting drinks for you and Sakura Ino?" Shikamaru suddenly said. Ino started before glancing at Naruto. "Ah, right," she said as she moved away from the two young men. Shikamaru looked over at Naruto, his normal lazy expression taking over his face as he looked at his friend. The two locked eyes, a silent conversation and expression of thanks passing between the two of them as they stood there. Shikamaru nodded his head slightly when Naruto smiled a bit wider. "Whatcha been up to, Shika?" he asked as Shikamaru looked over at him. Shrugging his shoulders, Shikamaru turned, obviously intent on leaving the middle of the room. "Just some light training and preparations," he replied. Naruto opened his mouth when he felt a shiver run down his back. He also quickly noticed that Shikamaru had frozen slightly as well. Naruto's eyes were about to pan around when he felt Yoshino appear in between Naruto and Shikamaru, quickly grasping onto their collars with a light yet firm grip. "Ah, the men of honor for the party," she said loudly, drawing the attention of the party-goers. Naruto and Shikamaru both looked up at the grinning Yoshino and then back to each other. "Troublesome," they both said as they closed their eyes, nodding in agreement. Two quick whacks upside the heads had the both of them sending small glares and mutters at Yoshino, whom now wore a very sweet smile. Now, this was supposed to be for the completion of the Chunin exams, but someone, here she fixed a single eye on Naruto, whom bowed his head a bit, causing a few chuckles to run through the crowd, decided that he had to take a mission, so I postponed this until today. She explained, "As such, we shall instead make this a happy promotion party. Say hello to Konoha's most recent Chunin Shikamaru and Naruto," she said as she clapped, most of the crowd following their example. Naruto was momentarily surprised. How'd she know I was promoted? The only people who know for sure are Gigi, Anko, and Kurenai-chan. He thought to himself. Looking around slightly, he noticed that Kurenai and Asuma had appeared in the crowd. Even Anko was grinning madly from her corner where she and Yugao were looking on. Naruto blinked when he realized he hadn't felt them join the party. As his shock disappeared, he looked over at Shikamaru, whom was looking at him with an appraising look. "So you got promoted too?" he asked rhetorically. "Troublesome," he muttered. Naruto smiled, lightly nodding in the direction of Shikamaru, who returned it again. "Now then, let's enjoy this wonderful cake, baked by the Akimichi clan just for this occasion," Yoshino announced as a large cake, baked to look like a kunai, was rolled into the room on a trolley and quickly passed out to the partygoers as sweets. Naruto and Shikamaru quickly broke away from Yoshino once the cake arrived, having been embarrassed enough by being put on the spot like that, and the two had headed over to their Jounin sensei. "Congratulations on your promotion, Naruto-kun. It was well earned," Asuma said around his cigarette. "Same to you, Shikamaru-kun. Your match was impressive," Kurenai complimented from next to the chain smoker, glaring slightly at the offending smoke set by Asuma's cigarettes. Naruto happily noted that she was wearing her new bracelet in full view of the party, and that it complemented her outfit well. The rest of the party was a blur of spending time with Shikamaru, reacquainting himself with his friend, while avoiding Ino and Sakura. It was late at night when Naruto finally stumbled into his bed. The wounds on his chest combined with the late hour caused Naruto to quickly pass out in blissed unconsciousness.